Hi, everybody. It seems like we've got a few folks that are logging in with us, and as y'all are getting settled, I wanted to just go ahead and welcome everyone on behalf of the school behavioral health community as well as the BASS team to our monthly webinar presentation where we are featuring the incomparable Dr. Kathleen Lane. So we will be looking at considerations for systematic screening preschool through grade 12, universal screening for internalizing and externalizing behaviors during the COVID-19 era. So I wanted to do just a little bit of housekeeping as we're getting started before I turn it over to Dr. Lane and let y'all know that we wanted to make sure that we were creating an environment today that was conducive to your feeling comfortable, to asking questions and sharing feedback on maybe where you're at within this topic area. So we will not be live streaming on Facebook today. And although we will archive this on our YouTube channel, we are going to take a considerable amount of time editing the video down to make sure that we are being considerate of your anonymity and increasing your ability to really interact with Dr. Lane today around this topic area. There'll be two 10-minute portions of the presentation where Dr. Lane will do a Q&A with everyone. You certainly can put your questions in the chat box, or you can put it in the Q&A and I'll populate that to Dr. Lane. So without further ado, and given that we've got so much incredible ground to cover, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Lane. Thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you for your time and sharing your expertise.
Thank you. I am really honored and humbled to be there. And so thanks sincerely to you, Taylor, as well as to Aaron and to Mark for this opportunity. I just want to start by saying that it is really humbling to be here and have so many wonderful people like yourselves that are taking time right now as we get ready to start the school year to actually think about how best to systematically look for and then support students as they're coming back to school. And this topic is near and dear to my heart. I've had the opportunity to work with a number of different wonderful friends and colleagues and literally thousands of teachers and district administrators through the years to look at systematic screening. And I have to say my heart is full knowing that how many people right now already have procedures in place and how many are here today to learn about it for the first time. And I just want to reassure you that wherever you are today is a good place to be. So you're here to learn a little bit more. And I want to let you know that, as Taylor mentioned, this will not be live stream. I want this to be a comfortable place for you to be, and know that snippets of this will be trimmed down and made available for people elsewhere. But this is just really a time for you to listen and learn and think about how we're going to best meet our students' needs when they return in the fall. And a lot of the resources that we're going to be sharing today come from a collection of district partners in schools and research team members from across the country. And there's so many people, I won't name them all right now, but just know that the work that's shared today is a reflection of our very collaborative team. So I appreciate that. On this website, ci3t.org, today's presentation is on the presentation tab, and there's a number of other resources available regarding systematic screening. If you click on the tab that says systematic screening, you'll get some overviews of different screening tools. There are coaching protocols, there are videos. So I just want you to relax and have a moment to enjoy, I hope, and think about what's coming forward. When everything happened in the world with COVID in March, I remember it was right before APBS last year when the world, took a pause. And when that pandemic was announced, there was like flipping a switch in schools. And so many, many people immediately went home. And it's a far more complicated task to bring students and teachers and other related service providers back into our school system safely and securely. And one of the best things that I think has happened out of this entire situation is that the world is on the same page in terms of prioritizing being ready to support students' emotional well-being and teachers' emotional well-being as they come back and play. And I have the great honor of working with Mark on PBIS at the National Center. And my role on that center is to support systematic screening efforts. And there are wonderful resources currently on pbis.org, and there's others that will be coming soon related to systematic screening. So please do look for those. And in the meantime, I'd also like you to take a peek at this tab on responding to COVID, because a lot of the illustrations I'm going to show you today are there. It's all free access. It's information and resources for you to use. There are presentations, there are infographics, there's very short videos, and a host of family resources, some of which we're going to be talking about today. But as we think about getting started with screening, one of the first places we're going to talk about today is the system that's in place, because the one thing that I would love for you to start with is I applaud the fact that you're interested in systematic screening and you're here to learn more from these wonderful people, but it is imperative that we have a plan before screening. It would not be helpful to people to be able to screen and then not have a plan to intervene. So when you take a peek at what's on this website, there's only 2 pages that are password protected, and those are Project Screen and Project Enhance. You're going to want to look for the tab that says Systematic Screening, and there's no password required to get on that. So the tab is Systematic Screening. Keeping that in mind, we're going to start by just taking a moment to talk about the great work and the great commitment that you've already made. And I really most sincerely want to start by simply saying thank you. Before everything happened with COVID and that response that occurred, even before then, if you were to take a picture in the United States of America, you would find in that snapshot of school systems that there are approximately 12% of school-age students that have some moderate to severe behavior challenges in schools. And by that, I'm talking about internalizing issues, shy, anxious, withdrawn, as well as acting out or non-compliance. And in that same picture, you would actually find that there's 20% of school-age kids that have mild to severe challenges. And I want you to take a moment and really think about what that means. Think about a high school setting, a middle school setting, an elementary setting. That means that that's a substantial portion of the student body that is struggling in some form. And you'll notice those circles overlap in that Venn diagram that you're looking at now. And what that is illustrating for you is that while it might be their acting out behaviors that is first to capture our attention, a lot of kids that struggle with acting out issues also have internalizing issues. And when we think about that, there's less than 1% of school-age kids that are going to go on to receive special education services to meet specifically their emotional and behavior challenges under that category of emotionally disturbed. And that means that the vast majority of support for students with behavior challenges is going to come from our general education community. So the work that we're doing in schools as part of systems is truly a gift. And when we think about the commitment that we have to positive behavior interventions and supports and other tiered systems that are integrated in nature, this is a real gift, because it's not just a child has a behavior challenge and refer them, we test them, we place them someplace else. We are going to be supporting these kids' needs within the general education system. I also want to make it really clear that this is not a one-man job, so that the grace and the beauty of some of these tiered systems that are in place is that they do have a structure for meeting kids' multiple needs, and that's where we're going to start today. We're going to actually start by talking about one particular integrated model called Comprehensive Integrated 3-Tiered Models of Prevention. Then we're going to talk a little bit about what screening looks like in the context of that. And we're going to weave throughout these different slides the considerations for screening in years past and in the COVID era. And when we end this, we're going to have a short list of you to kind of recap some of the big ideas. But for right now, I just want to invite you to listen for a moment. CI3T was actually started in the late 90s, specifically in 1996. And a lot of times at school systems at that point, they had multiple different teams in a school building. There was often a team that was committed to looking at students' academic data, another team that was committed to looking at office discipline referral data, and those data were used to move kids through tiers. There was another team that was committed to supporting kids' emotional well-being, sometimes referred to as a mental health team. And these teams were all doing good work, but not talking to each other. So when we think about a CI3T system, the intent is to have one comprehensive, integrated, 3-tiered model that is installed in a school. And you can think about it as being broader than a traditional MTSS system. It is broadened to also address explicit commitment to social and emotional well-being. And in CI3T schools, they're actually teaching soft skills at tier 1 to all students, not just students that have behavioral challenges, but to every student, to think about what they need to be self-regulated, self-determined, lifelong learners. And in this idea of CI3T, although it originated in California in the late 90s, we've had the opportunity through the graciousness of our funder, the Institute for Education Sciences, as well as funded projects from the Office of Special Education Programs and funded money from unfunded projects, as well as privately funded projects. We've had the opportunity to work with many, many different teams across the United States. And so when I'm sharing with you these ideas about CI3T, it's not like a theoretical thing, it's not a philosophical thing. It is really applied behavior analysis at scale, and it's been tested in hundreds of schools and many, many districts across the country. So keeping in mind that this is the base, some of the distinguishing features about CI3T are, one, as I mentioned, that there's that strong commitment to social and emotional well-being. Another distinction is that in addition to using data to move students between tiers, it's also data-informed professional learning for the adults to find out explicitly what do they need more of to feel comfortable building a base that is prepared to provide integrated instruction in academics, where we're actually explicitly teaching behaviors, giving kids opportunities to practice and receive reinforcement, and weaving into the fabric of our lessons not only the instruction of soft skills, but the use of soft skills. And when we think about that, that is the base experience that kids get when they come into a school that is doing CI3T. In many of our partnerships, there's a district CI3T leadership team, and then there's a team at each school. So when we think about that base, one of the big things that happened most recently is this idea about exploring what does it begin to look like in terms of remote and continuous learning. And in a normal implementation manual, we would have had these commitments to defining roles and responsibilities at tier 1 to say, here's what people need to know. And now people are using these same structures for CI3T to create clarities for all stakeholders. So here's what students need to know. Here's what faculty and staff need to know. Here's what families need to know. And here's what our administrators are going to be accountable for. And just like we would normally teach expectations at tier 1 to set the stage for positive, productive, and I think even joyful learning environments, has been getting clarity on what the tier 1 expectations are for kids in classrooms, in hallways, and in restrooms and things. And we need to now do the exact same thing in remote environments. So right now, as we're getting ready to launch the year, some of you might be beginning remotely. Some of you might be beginning in person, and some families might be in districts where there is a choice. One thing that we hope is on every one of these expectation matrices is a commitment to the safety procedures of like wearing your mask above your nose and your mouth, and making sure that we are maintaining that physical spacing. In the exemplars that I'll show you in a little bit, we're working with schools right now to build expectations for virtual learning. So if this was my classroom, you'll see it spaced out where a teacher's face might be here, and then their expectations are here as a Zoom background, so that people can use that still as their instructional tool. And we're teaching kids that that's the same. In a CI3T model, we've actually developed a tool, and you are welcome to use it. It's free access, it's on our website. It's called the School-Wide Evaluation Survey for specific settings. Again, it's the SES, it's on the Measures tab, and it's School-Wide Expectations for Specific Setting Survey. And in order to make a data-informed expectation matrix, all the faculty and staff in your school can complete this information to find out what do people think kids need to know to be successful in each of these settings, because truly, who knows better about cafeteria behavior than the cafeteria worker? Now, the next thing that's a part of these models is an explicit commitment to addressing students' emotional well-being at tier 1. And as part of a decision-making process, the teams work with their district leaders to walk through a resource adoption, and they're picking up an evidence-based program for use at tier 1. And so literally there's an instructional schedule built. And so there's a commitment that we are going to teach these units, these specific lessons, so that every single student in a school is learning things like how to self-regulate, how to show empathy, which incidentally is the one main skill I would recommend starting with for this year. We need to be prepared that when kids come back We need to create some safety for kids that have been through trauma. There's none of us that are going to come out of this experience untapped. There's going to be some of us who have lost people that we've loved. There are going to be some students who haven't been able to see people, their grandparents that they want to connect with, and we're going to have teachers in the same situation. And I really do believe, I know George Sagai has talked about, the potential for a better new normal. And I think that we have promise if we really take to heart what we need to accomplish by creating these safe and productive and clear environments. In many schools that are building CI3T model, it's an explicit building process where teams come and they're building each level of prevention, tier 1 for all, tier 2 for some, and tier 3 for a few. And so when we think about that building process, in a CI3T model, and it's completely manualized, and on that tab that says building your CI3T model, all the content to actually go do each of these professional learning sessions is widely available for you. And what I want to let you know is that it's explicit. So if you wanted to go do this in your schools next year, you are welcome to. And at the heart of CI3T is positive behavior intervention support. It is the establishment of expectations. It's giving kids opportunities to practice and be recognized for meeting those expectations. And we've learned important lessons through this process. We've actually learned that after session 4, when teams go back and at each step they're sharing information with their faculty and staff, we've actually learned that a school's mean score on this measure of social validity to find out what they think about the goals, the procedures, and the outcomes, that mean score during their training year actually predicts what implementation fidelity looks like in the year ahead. And that is fantastic news. For people committed to systems change, we need to find out where the discomforts and the comforts are in terms of the procedures and the goals so that we can make sure that we're providing high quality professional learning. And as you know, implementation sciences has taught us that this idea of systems change is big and it takes time. And sometimes people will say, gosh, can I do this in pieces? Could I just start with reading and then maybe math and then maybe behavior and then maybe those soft skills? And our encouragement is to be prepared to address the needs of the whole child. That's why we're building a base so that every single learner gets these building blocks of academics and behavioral supports and social and emotional well-being. As part of these plans, before screenings taking place, there is clarity on what is available for all, for some, and for a few. And in optimal circumstances during this planning process, you really want to take time to make sure that you are using research-based and evidence-based practice at every tier of prevention, because we simply don't have the time, the luxury to bring in things into our school systems that don't have enough evidence to suggest that if I do this, it's going to get this return for students. These are examples of actual implementation manuals from some of our partners. At the beginning of the planning process, it is simply a blank plan at tier 1. And so as people begin to think about defining what do students need to know about the academic, the behavior, and the social domain, and what do faculty and staff need to know about the academic, the behavior, and the social domains, in this particular year, we've been giving consideration to 2 main areas, not just what it's going to look like when kids come back face to face, but also what is it going to look like as part of continued learning experiences, whether remote or other capabilities. But the idea behind this is to provide clarity of what is the tier 1 experience. And this is going to be important to our equity work, because part of closing gaps in performance between different groups of students is closing gaps in access. So when we're thinking about what is it going to look like as far as providing academic instruction in reading and in math, we need to clarify that, whether it's elementary, middle, or high school. A big part of it is going to be making sure that your teachers, all teachers, general ed teachers, special education teachers, paraprofessionals, school psychologists, that we come in equipped with this whole tool of these strategies, what I would refer to as low intensity teacher delivered supports, things like how to do behavior specific praise, how to pre-correct. So like if this is your expectation matrix, how to remind kids of what we're looking for before they're in that situation so that you can set them up for success. Things like how to do active supervision. In addition to teaching those expectations, we also want to have a very respectful way to responding to challenging behaviors when they do come up. And from the lessons of, George Sugai and Rob Horner and Tim Lewis and others and the current center directors, we know that clear is kind. We need those expectation matrices, and we also need a plan for responding when the wheels fall off the bus. And from Jeff Colvin, we've learned, him and Terry Scott have taught us volumes about the importance of making sure that the adults know how to de-escalate students, so that rather than waiting for a student to be at peak behavior, we want to make sure that we are well equipped to provide instruction that is engaging and well-paced and interesting, so that we can actually encourage kids to enjoy learning in these safe, predictable environments. Also, as part of that, as I've been mentioning, is this idea of explicit instruction in soft skills, in the skills, the building blocks to help kids become self-determined lifelong learners. Kids need to have the opportunity to set goals, fall short, know how to pick themselves back up, how to regulate. When I think about the anxiety that many students are going to be coming back with next year, when those screening data are eventually coming in and you're using those, we need to have a plan for how we're going to respond. And chances are very high it will be more than 20% of the kids that will show higher than average internalizing issues and perhaps externalizing issues as well. And so we need to have a plan at tier 1 for how to teach all of this in an integrated way, so that kids are coming into these safe, positive, predictable environments, and that people are clear on what the acknowledgement systems are going to look like. The PBS National Center has been doing great work to set schools up for success in this area as they come back. And we've also on our team for CI3T also been building strong resources. On our website, you'll find some infographics and other professional learning materials to help you think about what acknowledgements might look like in a digital environment. Remember, some of the big ideas behind that is every adult in the system has to be able to engage in it. With the system that we bring in, ideally, if you're calling them best bucks in your school face-to-face, call them the same thing in your digital environment, because we want to program for generalization when kids eventually do come back full-time. And we want to make sure that every adult that kids are interacting with has the ability to give feedback, because that's the science behind it, right? It's applied behavior analysis at scale. And then we have to be able to use the data to see, is this happening, and how are people doing in terms of meeting their goals and what they thought the procedures were going to be. So even when we get into implementation, it's not just about screening kids to see who needs more. It's about having clarity at tier 1, because you don't want to be somebody that says to a family, your child needs more than tier 1 has to offer, when we're not even sure what's happening in place at tier 1. So a linchpin of this is going to be the idea of integrated lesson planning. So as we're thinking about getting ready to support our kids coming back, in addition to that academic objective, remember, I'm going to have clear expectations set. I'm going to remind kids of the expectations of what I'm looking for. And I'm going to weave into the fabric of the instruction that I'm providing clarity on which soft skills could be helpful here. Thinking about somebody's misbehavior, rather than just being upset that it's happening, ask yourself the question of why. What must have happened for them to make them feel that, that heightened sense of anxiety? And then to do this successfully, we want to make sure that we got teachers ready to use strategies to help kids be engaged. And we want to make sure that this is practical and feasible. And I'm going to show you some resources today where the professional learning materials are all built for you. They're step-by-step processes. And we've also made resources to help families learn these same strategies. But when we're thinking about using these strategies, these again would be woven throughout instruction. And this is a tall order. We know that it has been nothing less than inspiring to watch what educators have been doing since March. We've watched people quickly pivot and use their tiered systems to switch to providing safe, positive, productive learning environments remotely. And now we're figuring out creative ways to bring kids back safely. In our professional learning partnerships, I have been nothing but impressed with what I'm seeing from the CI3T team leaders and the principal leaders. These are just a few illustrations of some acknowledgements, reinforcers, if you will, that a principal has been using to both educate and encourage teachers to use these. One of these is a video that a principal sent out where she had logged into a Zoom room to watch one of her teacher's instruction. And she sent her this quick electronic, like a virtual postcard with a praise note statement and a quick audio to say, here's what I saw that I love so much. She's also been looking for research-based resources and sending those out regularly in a predictable pattern of communication for her teachers. We've watched other partners build reinforcement structures for use in digital environments. They've been wise about using the same terminology, as we mentioned, making sure that it's accessible. And so we've seen all this kind of great creativity about how those can be exchanged in virtual environments. All of this is central to Tier 1 before we start thinking about screening. So one of the first questions I'm going to ask people to think about is, what are your current practices? Are you somebody that is currently screening? And we're going to talk a little bit about what that means right now. When we talk about systematic screening, today we're going to be talking about teacher-completed screeners. And ideally, these are completed 3 times a year. In fall, about 4 to 6 weeks after instruction has started, again before winter break, and again 4 to 6 weeks after the school year starts. And so historically, that's been the 3 time frames. And right now, we are in uncharted territory in terms of how those screening scores function. There's been some real practical advice about, like, if a technical manual tells you screen 4 to 6 weeks after the school year begins, push that towards the 6-week mark to give teachers more time to be with kids. Because the truth of the matter is, we don't know right now how these scores function in remote environments. And we have been very, very thankful. We have an IES funded grant. It's a grant funded by the Institute of Education Sciences. And the entire grant is already dedicated to continuing to explore how these tools work, how reliable, how valid. And this year, we're actually partnering with schools right now to find out, do they work as well when kids have been receiving remote or in-person or hybrid instruction? And does it work well when the kid isn't a regular attender? So we know that there's important lessons to be learned. And as we think about screening, remember that the logic behind the screening is to make sure that we're taking clear looks 3 times a year from a teacher view to find out, is this student on point, or does the student have higher than average needs? And then we're going to use that information to shape instruction at Tier 1 and at Tier 2. And when we think about Tier 2, we're going to think about that in terms of intensity. And when we think about Tier 2, please don't compile separate lists of, here's what I'm going to do academically, here's what I'm going to do behaviorally, here's what I'm going to do for social and emotional well-being. Have one master list, and to the extent you can, make sure that you're addressing those Tier 2 needs in an integrated fashion. And remember, there are no Tier 2 kids. There are no Tier 3 kids. There are kids that have Tier 2 and Tier 3 needs. And similarly, there are kids that have the most intensive intervention needs. And so I want to reserve these really intensive resources for students that might be exposed to multiple risk factors right away that need that extra support. But ideally, you're going to have this continuum of supports at Tier 1, at Tier 2, and at Tier 3. And then the screening data are going to be used not by themselves, but in conjunction with other information to make smart decisions about how to best support students. But the real groundwork is going to be in making sure that you have a system that is implemented so that we have clarity at Tier 1. And we're going to use the data that we collect to inform our instruction. So what I'd like you to do right now, if you're willing, is either on a scratch piece of paper, or if you feel comfortable sharing with me and the others, could you type in what you feel like is going really well in your building right now? Like, are you a group that really has PBIS locked up? Have you already adopted and started to use like a validated curricula like Second Step or Positive Action or Connect with Kids? Do you have clarity on low intensity strategies? Can people get that type of professional learning? And I'm going to give just a moment of pause to you to think about what you're really doing well. And secondly, will you also please put in the chat, are you currently screening 3 times a year? Remember, screening tools require no time with students. The ones we're talking about are teacher completed. So it's not that I'm asking somebody like, Katie, are you internalizing? They're teacher completed, independent, very brief rating scales completed at those 3 times. So what are you doing well? And are you currently screening? And go ahead and put some of your updates in the chat, please. Terrific. I appreciate people taking just a moment or two to reflect. What do you have in place in your building? What are you interested in learning more about? And then, do you currently use systematic screenings? I'd also like you to take this moment to think about, are you using academic screenings in the same way? Things like Ames Web or Dibbles in fall and winter and spring, and using that to benchmark. We're now going to talk a little bit about how these data are used. So let's say now that maybe you are somebody that already has a systematic plan in place for benchmarking 3 times a year. And it's wonderful to know that, some of you are at the very beginning stages and you're just exploring right now. That's fantastic. And some of you are looking at pieces that might need refinement. And there are definitely other ways to connect kids to supports if you are not doing behavior screenings. However, some of the value of doing screenings, it allows you to actually look 3 times a year to see which students may need more than Tier 1 has to offer. So I know Tier 1's in place, I know what it is, I've got fidelity data that I might collect with something like the tiered fidelity inventory, and I'm going to use that information to describe what's happening at Tier 1. And then I'm going to start to think about what else might my teachers need to know, but I'm confident that no matter how awesome your instruction is at Tier 1, there are absolutely going to be some students that need more than Tier 1 has to offer. And so when we are thinking about getting started with screening, there's a few things you should know. Well, number one, there's great resources on pbis.org and on CI3T. You're going to want to pick something that is relevant for your context. So when you have to think about, like, who am I trying to find? I want to find something that's reliable and valid, something I can sustain for the long haul. And remember, it's done 3 times a year. This takes very, very little time. I'm going to show you a couple of screening tools here. And when you use these data, remember that what we're talking about right now is simply accurate detection as to who might need more than Tier 1 has to offer. And some people have concerns right now, such as those that are being voiced in the chat, and I appreciate you being willingness to share. Some people are nervous, is that, like, what do we do when we find them? And that happens all the time. I cannot tell you how many times people will say, Kathleen, you have got to be kidding me. Why would I want to screen 3 times a year to find kids with behavior challenges? I don't even know what to do with the ones that I have right now. And I'm here to tell you, those kids are already there. We want to make sure that we're screening 3 times a year so that we can find kids at the first sign of concern, and then we're going to have a plan for how to respond to those needs. So right now, that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about 3 things. We're going to talk first about what screening tools are. I'm going to give you a couple illustrations, and then I'm going to show you how you can very practically get started. First of all, please know there's a whole suite of different screeners. Some are commercially available, some are free access. And when you think about systematic screening tools, I'm not advocating for any one screening tool. I'm encouraging you to think through who you want to find, how much time do you have, what can you sustain over the long haul? Because just like you can't interchange like Ames Web and Dibbles probes, you can't do that with screeners either. I'm showing you this one screening tool that's a free access screening tool. The first 7 items were originally developed for use at the elementary level. It was developed by Tom Drummond, excellent researcher at a University of Oregon. And we've since expanded that tool to have additional items to also look for kids with internalizing issues. So this particular screening tool, if you were doing this in your district, the schools that we work with who have this screening tool in place, it's managed at the district level. They have a folder on their secured server. The superintendent has access to all of it. And when you click that open, there's a folder for every single school. The principal's permission for this one. So they open it up, and then there's what looks like an Excel spreadsheet that is pre-populated with students' names and ID numbers for each teacher. And rather than it being a teacher name on that each folder, it's the teacher's employee ID numbers, because sometimes people get married or unmarried, but the ID number never changes. So a teacher would log in, and it literally takes 15 minutes to screen your entire school, because all you're doing is it's an independent, it's not a conversation, it's not a team meeting. In this particular tool, this is the time frame. There are other screening tools that are also wonderful because they can connect kids to other resources. There's intervention materials that go with them. So please don't just grab this one, go do some due diligence to find out what it looks like. But I want to show you how these are used. And one thing I want to point out on these items, You are not saying that a student is a liar, is a stealer. You are looking to see, do these behaviors occur together and to a high enough degree? Because it's the total score for internalizing and externalizing that actually predict how kids do. So like at the elementary level, I would sum up these two total scores for every single kid in my class, and I'm going to use that information to place students into one of three risk categories. These are just screeners. These are not by themselves informing instruction, and these should never be used to exclude. So it's not like, oh, you've been screened, you're not going to go on that field trip. That's not what this is for. As a teacher, whether I'm looking at the elementary or middle and high school level, I'm using it to shape my instruction. At the middle school, we've learned that one item, peer rejection, actually becomes more reflective of internalizing issues than it did at the elementary level. So there's important lessons to be learned about how the screening tools work. So after we've selected, we want to install with care. And there's good briefs on pbis.org to give more details on that. But I want to show you how these data are used. These are data from one elementary school, real data, and you'll notice that these are all fall screening time points. So they waited the 4 to 6 weeks. They screened over time, and here you see the percentage of kids at low, moderate, and high risk. And you see that when they started, they had about 24-ish% of the kids at moderate risk. That does not mean that every one of those children need to go into a tier 2. With that percentage, with less than 80% of the kids floating in the low risk range, my first line of defense, just like reading instruction, would be to make sure that I'm shoring up tier 1. But now I don't have to wonder who's having higher than average acting out issues and say, anyone need help? Now I have screening data, get reliable, valid information as to who might need more than tier 1. In this particular school, look at the difference here. This was externalizing, this was internalizing, shy, anxious, and withdrawn. That was the school's major issue. And that's a performance pattern we've seen in lots of schools where we have much higher average or much higher rates of internalizing issues than you might expect. As part of this process, we're going to use screening data to take a peek. What is going on in kindergarten? What's going on in first grade, second grade? If these were your data for your school, you would be able to unpackage these and say, wow, my most immediate needs are in first grade. And I know that because that's the grade span that has the smallest percentage of kids in the low risk category. These are data from a middle school. And in secondary schools, it is not every single teacher screening every single period. You identify one period of a day where all kids are present, and that can be more challenging than you think. Some of the high schools that we've worked with, it's like, okay, 5th period's it. Every kid's here 5th period, but you remember some kids might be going to, come into a 0 period. Some might leave early for jobs. Some might be going to take college classes. But these data are reflective of one middle school when they got started, and this is their externalizing behavior patterns. And that very first year when they screened, I'd like you to take a peek. Like you can now look at their journey over time, and you generally see the green bars going up. That year of 2008, it's almost like those weight loss commercials. I always want to say those results are not typical. Like less than 1% is very rare for kids with really intensive acting out issues. Now at that school, the next year they had a slight increase in terms of externalizing issues. And they're like, oh my gosh, what's going on here? Well, they went back to their fidelity data and they realized that as they had been onboarding new teachers, they realized, oh my gosh, we didn't train them as well as to what the tier 1 happenings were. And a really important thing that was done in this particular middle school, this is one of the first middle schools to start screening. We actually looked to see how those scores were functioning. And we found that those fall scores, and remember, they're filled out by one teacher 4 to 6 weeks after the year began, those scores actually predicted how kids did that year. So kids that started off the year in the green, those 422 kids, by the end of the year, those kids had earned 1.5 office discipline referrals. The kids at the beginning of the year that were there in the yellow and the moderate risk, by the end of the year, they had earned about 5, and the kids in the high risk category had earned about 8. And the same was true for academics. Take a peek at those grade point averages, and you'll see that kids that started off the year with higher risk ended with lower grade point averages, and they failed more classes. And you'll notice in these statistical reports that there are no differences between the kids in terms of course failures from like moderate to high risk, which means any sign of risk at the beginning of the year behaviorally, we need to pay attention to, because it's what we've known for years, that the behavior and academics go together. How we teach influences how kids behave, and how they behave influences how we teach. And I have been so impressed watching people using screening data through the years. These are data that a high school principal emailed into us. And he's like, hey, Kathleen, I noticed that one of my math teachers mentioned that we now have been doing this for 3 years and we could look at trends. Look at their internalizing issues over the 3 years of implementing CI3T. Now remember, this is not causative, it's just descriptive. Don't draw causal conclusions, but you are seeing this improvement in terms of more kids in the low risk category and fewer kids in the high risk category. And we see the same thing with acting out. And I'm telling you all this because this is the type of information we need to look at to see how are these screening tools functioning. And in the COVID era, the reality of it is there needs to be quick lessons learned about how these tools functions. And I'm thankful to say that in our partnerships as part of Project Screen, we will be getting those lessons learned on a quick iterative cycle this year. But for right now, we do want to continue screening, but we want to do so cautiously, remembering that when we collect these data need to be shared with care. The way I'm showing you right now, like take a look at my school as a whole, unpackage it by grade level, and begin to think about how I'm going to use it to shape my instruction. This is what we want to be paying attention to. And we also want to look at other sources of information, like attendance, like where they're starting off in terms of academics. On this tab that some of you have already logged into, you're going to see some resources to continue the conversation about screening in the COVID era. The 3 things that we're going to really attend to in this last piece of our conversation together is that we do want you to continue screening, but we want to do so in support with high quality professional learning, like what you're getting from Mark and Taylor and Aaron. You want to make sure that you're using those data wisely. So look for the briefs that will be coming on pbs.org. Realize that screeners are just screeners. It's like getting your blood pressure checked when you go to the doctor's office. If it's high, maybe it is indicative of something going on medically, or maybe it's indicative of the fact that you're anxious about being at the doctor's office. And then we also want to talk about screening responsibly, and I'll talk more about that in just a moment. But I've just shown you one screener. On that tab, you can click on any of those little accordions and open it up to listen to a little information or read a little information about different screening tools that are available. And there's also coaching protocols. So if you are a group that's getting ready to get started screening for the first time this year, if you scroll to the bottom of that tab, there's explicit instructions that are editable. So you can download the Word documents, and there's colors in blue that basically say customize this part for your school or for your district. But once you get the data, remember, we're going to screen with care. We're going to get some high quality professional learning. We're going to use multiple sources, and we're going to make sure that we're screening responsibly. When we get those screening data, we're going to begin by taking snapshots to see what does it look like? What are we managing in fall? These are data from a school in North Carolina. The very first time they screened, they did not have uniformity in terms of PBIS or CI3T. And you can see that the percentage of kids that are scoring in the tier 2, if you would, in the yellow category is substantial. That does not mean you begin there. If those were your data, this means that in the areas of reading and pro-social behavior and math and motivation to learn, my work begins at tier 1. So your first response to screening is going to be to see what you need to do at tier 1. That is very different than this school that I showed you from this middle school, where tier 1, it looks to be pretty good shape if I know that it's implemented with fidelity and if these are the data. The second thing I'm going to do, and this is what I'd really love you to listen to carefully right now, is empowering the people that are working with students. So when you screen and you get that information, I'm going to look at multiple sources of information. When I say that, I'm literally encouraging you to get into your current management system. There's nothing for you to buy. Work within the system that you've got and be able to pull up. And these are fictitious students' names. But if this was my 5th grade class, I would say, show me how these kids are doing in terms of reading and math. What does their externalizing score look like? What's internalizing? I might pull office discipline referral. And remember, in years past, like 0 to 1 means tier 1's working. 2 to 5 means I'm looking at tier 2 supports, and then 6+ means higher than that. And then I'm going to look at absenteeism, because remember, if kids are not regular attenders, and these data get overlooked so often, but if kids are not regular attenders, it's not a surprise. And then rather than dealing with this in silos, look across. Because if I have information like that child, OTAM, like look across, that kid's not coming to school a lot and they have quite a few office discipline referrals. It's not surprising that they don't know how to engage in school in a really successful way. They're not there a lot. And then it wouldn't surprise me that they have multiple needs academically and behaviorally. That's a very different situation than a child who is a regular attender. So to do a comprehensive, integrated plan for supporting each kid, we need to know multiple sources of information, but it has to be collected reliably and in a way that allows teachers to interact with it. And I have to say, like, as a mother of 2 kids of my own, 20 and 24, and as a researcher, the kids, honestly, I worry the most about right now are kids with internalizing issues, because they would not have been the kids that would have been earning office discipline referrals in the past. If you don't screen, you are going to miss information on how those kids are coming in. So I would look at these data, and if this was really how my class looked, then I would start to think about what is the smallest shift I can make in my own instruction to increase engagement and minimize disruption. So I'm going to be thinking about, like, how well am I doing behavior specific praise? If I've got my expectation matrix and I've got my acknowledgement system, I might have a ticket system in place where I know to give, like, kids an acknowledgement to say, thank you for coming on time. It really helps us to get our whole class started. That's important. Building in choice. Like, if I have a starter activity for kids, just building in choice of, here are 2 questions, write down your answers to 1 in a chat. That's a place to start. There's a great study done by Lee Kern showing that kids with really significant behavior problems, simply offering them, they gave them a list of 10 things that they had to do, and just their entire intervention was say, pick the one you want to start with. That's great. That's teaching self-determined behaviors. That's teaching autonomy. This is where I would be prepared to start. And on our website, we've got explicit resources, little quick checklists of how to do those strategies. You can also look to Brandy Simonson and Jen Freeman have wonderful resources of these classroom level types of supports, but we want to put these tools in the hands of every single teacher. And on our website, on that COVID page, we're right now making very short 2-minute videos, 1-page infographics, and quick checklists about how to do that in remote environments. And I also want to show you on this tab is when you do get back to school face-to-face, there's a bunch of different free access on-demand resources on how to engage in these and other supports. When you open these up, you'll find an editable PowerPoint to walk people through the steps. You'll see treatment integrity checklists. There's these quick guides for getting started. So you can teach your teachers how to increase opportunities to respond, how to build in choices and the like. So first thing is shore up tier 1. Next thing, empower your teachers. And some people might think that, like, why is that a specific step? Ideally, every one of those is going to be at tier 1, but if they're not, we want to make sure that we are paying attention to the needs of the general and special education teachers to make sure they have what they need to facilitate engagement and minimize disruption. And that's when I get into tier 2. Then I'm starting to think about intensity. And when I think about intensity for tier 2, I think about it like CrossFit. I am 53 years old right now. My daughter turns 21 next month. And right before she left for college, I had learned from my son, who went to school a few years before her, that they really don't want to hang out with you their senior year. But I remember just telling her, you know, Katie, I want to find a way to spend more time together. Let's do something together. I'm like, let's go do yoga. And she's like, no offense, Mom, but yoga's for old ladies. And I'm like, okay, well, shots fired. And I said, she's like, I'm like, well, how about we go do like a Zumba class together? So we went to Zumba and I was doing all this kind of stuff. And I thought I was fairly stunning. And she's like, that can never, ever happen again. She's like, if you want to hang out with me, I'm going to be at the gym. And she's a CrossFitter. And CrossFit is constantly varied functional fitness at high intensity. It's cardio, it's Olympic weightlifting and other types of lifting, and it is gymnastics. So I'm like, if you're there, I'm there. Our first activity was jump rope. And let me just say again, I'm a mother of 2 and I was 48, not prepared for that experience. The next activity was, she was doing like chest to bars where you pull yourself up on that rig that you're looking at. I still can't do a pull-up. This guy that was the coach, he's like, hey, let me put this like giant rubber band right here. So we put a round on that rig. He's like, put your leg in there. He's like, now pull. And nothing happened. He's like, all right, you need 2 of those. So he puts 2 rubber bands, and all of a sudden it's like a miracle. Like my chin is over the bar. And that idea of like using the rubber bands, it kept me in that classroom. I'm still going to do CrossFit with her 5 years later. There were the adjustments, the intensity, just the tweaks that I needed to be able to access instruction. And at no point did anybody say, Kathleen, you urinated on yourself in the warm up, you can't stay. That wasn't the approach. It was like, what can I do to help this child access this instruction? Same deal in education. And so when we think about in a CI3T model, there are these clarities of what is available. And you'll see a name of an intervention, a description, and how school-wide data are used to connect kids to those supports. And then anything that you do extra for a student, we still need to know, is it happening, which is treatment integrity? Is it acceptable to this child? Because if they tell you up front, this is going to be super embarrassing to do a self-monitoring intervention, then don't do it, in addition to progress monitoring. So we're going to collect those data to see how it's working. And then we need to know if that is enough or if it is time to move on to a tier 3 support, something like a functional assessment-based intervention. And there are decades of wonderful work done by John Umbright and Eric Common and others that you can watch. And I'm going to encourage you, when this is done today, to put 10 minutes in your calendar to ask yourself the question, what's going really well in my building at tier 2, at tier 3? Do I have plans in place for how I can use screening data to connect kids to supports? So I'm literally asking you, please just right after this is over, take 10 and ask yourself, do I have clarity of my tier 1? Do I have a plan for non-responsiveness? And in between, do I have plans to support my teachers? Now, when we think specifically about putting all these dots together right now, if we had not been in the COVID era, I would tell you, before you screen, you absolutely must have a plan to intervene. It is not okay just to, even despite the best of intentions, you don't want to just start putting in a teacher completed screener without educating your teachers, making sure that your system is clear and that you're ready to use those data to inform instruction. And I want to make sure that I'm building stakeholders' expertise. And I want to have those structures like many that I was just showing you. Like, do you have clarity on what is tier 2 and how the data might be used? And then we need to screen responsibly, thinking about security. Make sure your family community knows what it is, how they're going to use it. And then you need to be responsible for knowing your state and local laws. And that is still true today in this COVID era. And in addition to that, I would offer these 3 recommendations. Number 1, as I've said several times now, be cautious. Nobody has done psychometric studies about screening in virtual environments. They're going to be taking place right now. I know our team's working on them and other people are too. So partner with your local universities. Get with people who can look to see, do our fall scores actually predict how kids are doing? Are we accurately detecting who needs more? And remember, in screening, there always are going to be mistakes made, but think about the type of mistake you're going to make. A false positive. Let's say I screen a kid in and I say this kid needs extra help when in fact they don't. What's the consequence? They might get extra help. They might get a higher rate of behavior specific praise. They might get check-in and check-out in a virtual environment. They might get a tier 3 support, functional assessment-based intervention. I'm not that worried about that, to be honest with you. What I'm terrified about are false negatives. Overlooking a kid who needed help, saying that kid doesn't need anything. So when we think about screening right now, engage with others to see how it's working. And in that slide that I showed you, look at multiple sources of data. How are they doing academically? Are they regular attenders right now in whatever context that they've decided to be in, whether it's remote or in person or hybrid, are they attending regularly? And use that information to put together a great instructional experience for them. And then this part, and please listen really carefully on this, screen responsibly. And by this, I mean, everything we've been talking about right now are teacher completed screeners. Please remember, teachers are mandated reporters. If they suspected that a student was at risk to themselves or that they were a risk to others or being hurt by somebody else, they would have already reported that. So there's essentially not new information. There's no new information coming in. It's how the data are aggregated together to get you these scores that are used to shape instruction. Many people are leaning right now towards screeners completed by families or the students themselves if they are of age, and they're great validated tools to do it. And I applaud you if you're ready to do that, but you need to be ready. You have to be prepared to respond what's shared. So if a family is filling out a screening tool, or if a student is, that's not data that can get scored later and worked on it at somebody's convenience. You need to be prepared to respond to the information, because without that, we're allowing a known vulnerability to go unsupported. To stay in tune with what we're going to be learning on that, please do check back in on this page, and it's called Systematic Screening. On there right now, you can find a short little like 3-minute video that capitalizes on just the key recommendations. You can find a 23-minute one, a little slightly longer one. There's a 1-page infographic, but one thing to keep in mind right now, if you screen, there needs to be a plan to respond. And at the base of it, of course, is your system. And as you think about moving forward, please remember, let's have a plan where we are prepared so that if we start back face-to-face and it switches, we need to be ready to do that. And part of the clarity on screening and how to use it is to reassure teachers that there is a plan. I am, again, just so incredibly impressed. I have never been more honored than I am right now to be a member of this educational community. People have worked tirelessly, relentlessly to figure out evidence-based practices for right now, what's working for whom and under what conditions. I'm thankful to the team of people that I get to work with, who even on their most exhausted days, they're committed to making sure that people have the resources they need. On our website, where it says responding to COVID, you can find exemplars of CI3T implementation plans for elementary, middle, and high school. You'll also see new today, or even resources about like videos on how to do that in remote environments, how to support families in using those low intensity support. So if you're supporting an elementary system, check this out. Same for middle, same for high. And in those, just look for the commonalities, whether it's digitally or if it's in person. We want to make sure that people are prepared for low intensity supports. We want to make sure that we have expectations. On pbs.org, there's a great resource on the front page to help people set up to build expectation matrices. And remember, please don't switch systems. So if you've already been teaching your kids language systems about, how to self-regulate, how to problem solve, how to, be more aware of themselves, healthy bodies, healthy minds, stay with the same system and show them how it's used in these new settings. So as we wrap up today, I've asked you to please reserve 10 minutes at the end of this call, and then I want you to think about your action planning. It might be that you make a commitment to calendar time when you pour a cup of coffee later tonight or a cup of tea, and you think about, okay, what do I want to check out? What might be useful for my school? You might choose to check out an exemplar. These are resources that we built for families to help families who are supporting instruction. So there's guidance for families on how to build expectation matrices for their homes, how to build schedules, how to do some of those low intensity supports. And I'm thankful to say that through some of the talented members of our team, these have also now been translated into Spanish. So if you just scroll down, they're right there. And some of the videos are also being translated into Spanish. Also, as I mentioned, on pbs.org, you can create a matrix for remote instruction. So you're going to see lots of options for really strong procedures for clarifying what is expected for kids in different settings. And just like before, we teach it, we practice it, and we need to be prepared to create a kind, positive, and predictable environment for students. I am asking you, despite all this, to think about what is your plan for screening next year? What are the data that you're going to collect and in what time frame? So when you are thinking about that fall window, I encourage you to maximize your window. Lean towards the 6 weeks. If it says 4 to 6 weeks in your screening tools manual, think about those outcomes. Some people are saying, should we still continue to screen? I personally think yes. The guidance that we've been providing is that it should not be the only screening tool. Use multiple sources of data, engage to see how the schools are functioning, and screen responsibly. If you're bringing in other sources of information, we want to be prepared to use that. Just like always, plan regular times for your leadership team to get together to be ready to look at and respond to those data. So we want to have them accessible, shareable, interpretable, and usable to shape instruction. And if you would like, please feel free to join us. We host what are sessions called Project Empower. There's just some standalone topics. I think the first one's coming up on September 15th to talk about these and other topics. We also offer monthly coaching calls if you have questions about screening that you didn't feel comfortable putting in to the chat or to the questions. But if you are concerned right now about the resources to respond, remember your first line of defense is clarity of tier 1. Then we're connecting to teachers to support. And then we're thinking about connecting the students to supports. There is ample information here and resources. And I also encourage you to reach out to Wendy Oakes from Arizona State University. And I just want to close by telling you how much I appreciate the opportunity to be invited here. I think time is 100% at a premium. And it speaks volumes that you came to learn about screening. So screen with care. Be ready to respond to what's coming in, look at multiple sources of data, and partner with your university or district partners to make sure that those screening tools are functioning. And in the meantime, take good care of yourself, and I wish you a safe and positive start to the school year.
I would love to be able to like unmute everyone's audio so that we could just give you a round of applause. Absolutely fantastic in every way. We had no doubt. It was an absolute privilege to have you with us today. Phenomenal as usual. You are brilliant and charismatic and an absolute rock star. Thank you so much to everyone who joined us today. I hope that you found this helpful and that you can springboard off of the passion that Dr. Lane has shared with us today. Please do check out ci3t.org this evening with your tea. And while you're doing that, if you want to take an extra deep dive, you can venture over to www.schoolbehavioralhealth.org/BASK and check out our wealth of resources that would be a great companion to those that you find on the CI3T website. Also follow us on Facebook at Advancing SBH and subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you can access the archive of all of our incredible BASK materials, which will include Dr. Lane's fantastic presentation today. So everyone have a fantastic evening. We look forward to collaborating with you in the future, Dr. Lane.
Take care. Thank you again.
Bye all.
Be safe.